All right then.
I have observed you, Watcher. The way you handled that noble girl in Deerford, delivering an idol effigy to her uncle. A most careful scheme. You have labored at the pleasure of others. That shriveled hag in Hodret House, those pompous deer wooden zealots, the wretched tribe, and now the gods give you orders and commands, even while you set out to fix what they cannot. Yet what have they offered you? The exiled queen is not an ungrateful patron. Finish the work Theos began. Strengthen Woodica with these souls and allow her to become the most powerful of all the gods, with you as her favored. Yes, consider well the prosperous lives and the power that awaits you. I'm certain you'll choose well.
At your command, the ancient device became your instrument, spinning to life with deafening resonance and gathering up the swirling essence like thread on a great spindle. There, in the pale pulsing glow of the machine that set you on this path long ago, you summoned all your strength, focusing on your objective and blocking out all else. With a single concussive blast that rocked the chamber and sent you tumbling to the ground, you freed the souls from their stasis. Exhausted, your consciousness slipping away, your last sight was of the machine, dark and dormant. Then your eyes closed, and sleep welcomed you at long last. After coming to and searching for some time, you discovered the route Theos used to enter Sun and Shadow, and embarked on a long and arduous ascent back to the surface. You emerged in Ter Evron after days of tunneling through the rubble Theos had left behind, and when you stepped into the daylight, you were faced with a different Deerwood than the one you had left. At your direction, the souls diverted by Theos were guided back to the vessels originally meant for them. For the first time, parents of hollow-born children woke to the cries of their infants and looked into their eyes to see them staring back. People fell to their knees where they stood, thanking Helia or Mogren, or even Aethys for their forgiveness of whatever guilt they felt they bore. But for all the relief that had come to some parents, others only found new grief. For many thousands of Hollowborn had died during Wideone's legacy, many by their parents' own hands. For those children, there would be no homecoming. Yet the last Hollow birth was in the past now, and those parents willing to risk trying for a new child were frequently rewarded, often with twins. Many felt they saw Helia's hand in it, and the year would be remembered as the year of Helia's splendor. The loss of the souls you had promised to Entropy would be no setback to Remergand, nor to Andra, for the Beast of Winter trudges ever forward, and the will of the Lady of Lament is as unstoppable as the tide. In Deerwood, the weather quickly chilled. Unseasonable frosts destroyed the year's harvests before giving way to the coldest winter in memory. Many who survived the famine would soon freeze to death in their own homes. The oceans proved no safer. A barrage of squalls pounded the harbors along the Deerwooden coast for months, sending many ships to be forever lost in the depths of Andra's domain, either mourned or forgotten, both to the lady's liking. It is said that Galawain is the enforcer of the guards, and is known to hunt down those who wrong them. To wrong Galawain, then, is truly to wake the beast, and the Father of Monsters took great umbrage at your broken promise to him. Along with Mogren and Abidan, Galawain embarked upon a more direct approach to claiming his quarry. In the months that followed, the frontier settlements of Deerwood were inexplicably attacked by packs of beasts and monsters, suddenly organized and unafraid to approach Kith on their own land. Many such villages were all but destroyed by the time troops could be dispatched from local garrisons. Those that weren't destroyed by the beasts of Galawain often found themselves at the mercy of the fires of Mogren. A dry spell throughout Deerwood led to a rash of forest fires on a scale not seen since the War of Black Trees, and many settlements paid the price for their proximity to the wilderness. In the cities, meanwhile, dabblers in animancy who had placed souls into golems and other moving vessels soon found that their creations had risen up against them. Such constructs terrorized their surroundings, killing indiscriminately and often in great numbers before being subdued. Followers of Bereth have a saying that life is a debt all must pay in death, and their god is known to always collect what is owed. In breaking your word to Bereth, a debt was created. Souls were owed to the cycle, and the agents of the god of inevitability would not be refused. An epidemic of unexplained deaths struck Deerwood in the days that followed the legacy. Most often, the dead would be travelers on the road, known to be a favorite target of Bereth's pallid knight, who exacts impossible tolls from those who have journeyed for too long. The elderly, too, seemed to pass on in alarming numbers. But just as often, the deaths appeared to strike randomly, and for no reason at all. Those who sensed the involvement of the twinned god dubbed the calamity Bereth's Price, supposing it a payment for the end of Widewind's legacy. Lord Radric's zeal had brought him back to life once, but it would not do so again. Radric's destruction at your hands spelled the end of his suffocating rule over Gilded Vale and the surrounding area. In his absence, the village prospered, becoming a popular destination for new settlers anxious to leave Defiance Bay after the riots. Without a nearby ruler, it also grew more wild, with many settlers moving on as soon as they'd arrived, turned off by lawlessness that was excessive even by Deerwooden standards. Nevertheless, despite the challenges of living there, Gilded Vale had survived, and would continue to survive for the foreseeable future. Following the assassinations of Duke Avar Wolfgren and Lady Webb, Defiance Bay was thrown into political upheaval. In the ensuing weeks, the streets had become the domain of looters and blackguards. Few dared to step outside their own doors alone or unarmed. But once the dozens had regrouped in the wake of the riots, they quickly put an end to the criminal activity, patrolling the streets in droves and administering their brand of law on any perceived offenders. They also took the opportunity to depose the weakened Knights of the Crucible from their position of authority, branding them traitors to the people for their actions during the riots. Whatever knights weren't stoned to death in front of their keep were forced into exile. The external contingent of knights stationed at Fleetbreaker Castle would remain there, their high justice plotting the city's recapture. The dozens would soon find themselves overwhelmed by the problems of a leaderless metropolis, and in the days and months ahead, Defiance Bay remained on the brink of collapse. The destruction of the machine atop Ter Noaneth spelled the end of the reanimated corpses in Heritage Hill. Though at first few were willing to venture into the abandoned district, it was soon cleaned out and rebuilt. The district's horrors still fresh in people's minds, it would be some time before it was fully repopulated. But eventually the lure of cheap prime land would all but erase the memory. The Duke's assassination at the apparent hands of an animancer had caused catastrophic rioting in the streets of Defiance Bay. But those who had escaped the melee in the palace hearings remembered the testimonies of the strange guest who had shown up that day and absolved animancy, implicating the leaden key instead. The rumor spread quickly, and soon the popular belief was that the assassin had been a leaden key spy. When the legacy had lifted, people came to see it not as a sign that the riots had been according to the god's wishes, as Theos had hoped, but as a confirmation that animancy had never been the source of the problem in the first place. Deerwoodans instead convinced themselves that the riots had somehow purged Defiance Bay of leaden key spies, and that the end of Widewind's legacy was their well-deserved reward. The rage against animancers was quickly forgotten, and those who had survived were permitted to return to Brackenberry Sanitarium and rebuild it so they might resume their studies. In the town of Deerford, an underground cult dedicated to Scan insinuated itself into the town's institutions. It became a popular travel destination for the wealthy, who were actively courted by the town's leadership. But few who visited the town would ever return, as they soon found their fortunes plummeting and their reputations destroyed by their own kin. Abidon's renewal brought new vigor and purpose to a god long known for quiet, steady labor. Handicraft saw a revival in the Deerwood, and no smith wanted for an apprentice. Additionally, Abidon's restored interest in preservation led to redoubled efforts to survey Engwithan ruins. Animancers and craftsmen alike found much to study, but tensions with Air Glanfath rose. As for Stalwart, the Battle of Caron's Scar only strengthened their resolve to unlock the mysteries of Durgan steel and build new marvels with the White Forge. However, Stalwart's ambitions brought them into further conflict with the Raid Serens, as more and more impoverished communities gathered at the border and vowed to finish the work of the Iron Flail. It would be many generations before the region saw peace. The Flames That Whisper clan found a cautious peace with Stalwart, particularly once the villagers heard of the aid the ogres had offered against the Eyeless. The clan moved back into the Russet Wood, and as Stalwart grew in prestige, the villagers formed a tighter alliance with their ogre neighbors. Within a generation, ogre traders visited Stalwart, and village hunters were welcome in the Russet Wood. Harmka's death had brought the Devil of Carrick little satisfaction. In time, her taste for vengeance soured. What replaced it was a hunger to feel something, anything, new. Summer had thinned the snowpack twice over when she felt the joint at her elbow first begin to stiffen. She turned her back on the hopes of animancy and civilization and walked east. She pushed through the mountains, past Raid Ceres, and into the broad plains of Ishamiddle. She had forgotten what it was like to simply journey, no goal or destination in mind. Though she felt nothing more than the steady thump of her feet on the road, the endless horizons and grassy meadows were new to her. She measured her time in the gradual rusting of her body and was satisfied. Her movements slowed, but so did the world around her. Waist-high grasses undulated and tacked in the wind, as gradual as the tides. Sparrows and blackjays made steady pilgrimages across the sky, each flap of their wings a solemn salute. She could hardly move when she found something she had never seen before, the ocean. With the last of her strength, she pulled herself beneath the water, content at last to feel the movement of currents and the constant caress of the waves. Zawa came to believe that the Dakan had survived through him. He returned to Ishamiddle, where he united a number of small, vulnerable tribes under the beliefs of his people. He called them Takanakin, kin of Takan, and under his tutelage, they became strong enough to resist would-be conquerors. Zawa taught his secrets not to one chosen person, but to all, that the line of knowledge might never be broken. Free from the burden of her memory, Maneha soon left the gift-bearers and resumed adventuring. Now that she had a taste for the world, she wanted to experience it anew. Maneha rediscovered her zest for battle, extravagance, and romance. She kept her gaze on the horizon, looking from one journey to another more distant, from the lover in her arms to another more fervent. Hers was a life of excitement, violence, and passion. She moved too quickly for regret to catch up with her, and she hoped only that she might outpace it in the next life as well. The fortress of Cadnua emerged as a bastion of security in the midst of an untamed land, becoming the envy of every thane and earl in Deerwood. Legend grew over time of its impregnability, and stories of formidable invaders easily scattered by the keep's defenses became popular around the hearths of Deerwoodinians. Likewise, it also became a beacon to travelers, merchants, and visiting dignitaries alike. Reputed as the finest fortress in all Deerwood, people would journey from near and distant lands alike to experience its fabled hospitality and grandeur. After the death of the master below, a strange quiet fell over the endless paths of Adnua. The attacks on the fortress above ceased, Adnua's silent titan the closest remaining thing to a master in its musty, forgotten passages. Palagina had gone against the Duke Spell's orders by inventing a new trade arrangement with the Anamenfath to accommodate the recovering Deerwooden market. With the Deerwood's people still weakened by Weidman's legacy, the Valian republics easily pushed their would-be competitors out of the market. For her outrageous insubordination and audacity, Palagina was banished from the republics. She traveled north in the Eastern Reach, avoiding Valian ports and entering the ranks of the kind wayfarers. Despite her bravery and dedication to those in her care, her strange appearance made her feel like an outsider wherever she went. With your business concluded, Haravius quietly took his leave and headed home to Thane Bog. The elders of the Fisher Crane had not warmed to Haravius in his absence, and when he arrived, he was denounced and scorned. Haravius spoke of his deeds and of his communion with Galawain, yet none would support his petition to return to the tribe. One by one, starting with the oldest, Haravius challenged each member of the council to single combat, humiliating the Riau in a series of savage duels. With half the council bloodied and shamed, the elders at last acknowledged Haravius' strength, announcing him a hunter of the Fisher Crane tribe. Upon being granted this title, Haravius calmly left the village and embarked again on his life of wandering. Adair chose not to return home to Gilded Vale. Still most comfortable far from cities, he settled in Deerford, which, like many towns in the Deerwood, was beginning the slow process of rebuilding. Believing now that it was the obligation of Kith to be the leaders their gods had not, Adair was soon named mayor of the town, and under his guidance, Deerford soon began to prosper. He expelled the last of the Scanites from the area and drew new settlers with the offer of land, a trick he had learned from someone he otherwise preferred to forget. With each passing day, Deerford would come to more closely resemble the Gilded Vale of Adair's childhood, the one worthy of its name. When the dust settled in sun and shadow, Aloth looked upon the remains of Theos Ixarchanon, his former master. He saw where the Grand Master had gone wrong and what would be required to undo the harm Theos had wrought. With a flick of his wrist, he burned Theos's robe, headdress, and every other symbol of the man's power. Never again, he vowed, should Kith live in fear and blind obedience to an authority they did not understand. Armed with the knowledge and courage he had gained on his journeys with the Watcher, he set out on the long and lonely task of dismantling the Leaden Key. With both their aims fulfilled, Kanarua bid the Watcher farewell and sailed back to his beloved Rawatai. There, he reported on his findings to the Lore College. Kana spoke of the Engwithan people, describing both their vile experiments and their inspiring accomplishments. He spoke too of the destruction of the tablet by the Leaden Key and the group's efforts to erase the Engwithan legacy from the world. Both inspiration and cautionary tales, he said, could be found in the world beyond Rauatai's borders. Kana urged his people to continue to pursue knowledge abroad so that the lessons found there might benefit Tekoa. Kana's inability to prove his theory of Engwithan influence diminished his academic standing, but his passion drew much interest from those less concerned with degrees. Kana swiftly became an influential figure in the move toward a more collaborative approach to expansion on the northern continent. In his personal life, he came to enjoy the reputation of an affable eccentric, willing to share grand and impossible secrets, along with a drink and a song. With Theos defeated and the souls released from sun and shadow, healthy children were born once again in the Deerwood. Pleasant and peaceful memories rose to fill the cracks in the grieving mother's mind. She returned to the birthing bell, unaware that the village nearby had become an empty desolation in her absence. Thus she began her tireless vigil atop the Adra, awaiting mothers and children who never came. Durrance used Magrin's strength only until Theos had been cast from the world, and then swore off her influence entirely. Regret came to weigh heavily on his mind, and a man who had never previously lacked for words or opinions came to embrace silence and contemplation. He continued to wander, penniless and destitute, searching now not for the reason for his goddess's silence, but for a mechanism for revenge. The charred robes he continued to wear as a reminder that he had been burned by his goddess, and not just by the flames of the Godhammer. In her 4-month journey back to Nositoc, Sagani found that the landscape she traveled had become strangely colorless, the food bland and unsatisfying. She watched the Deerwood, Air Glonfoth, the Valian Republics, and the lands beyond slide by with a dull sense of dread. She returned home to great celebration, yet the words of joy and congratulations rang hollow to her. Old beloved songs sounded toneless. The rituals of changing seasons became drudgery, and Sagani experienced her life back in Masuk as if in someone else's skin. So she fought to feel the worth of her actions, or at least to let her village feel them. She led ever longer and more ambitious hunts, mentoring the younger rangers who followed her. On one such expedition, her party was beset by a blizzard, and she pressed on where her companions turned back. She did not return to Masuk. For you, the death of Theos brought an end to your waking visions, and a silence to the whispers of the past. In their absence, you were able to sleep. The questions of a distant lifetime ceased to trouble your soul. All that remained was what to make of the answer. But at the moment, there was little to be done, and the matter would have to wait. A long journey loomed ahead.